Good morning. Today we're going to talk about different ways to collect data for statistics. Take a minute and answer these questions, and we'll talk about them in just a minute. So you want to know how much money the average student spends on prom. You surveyed 250 students from the Ray Peck Junior class. Take a minute and identify the population and the sample. Now, would the average cost be a parameter or a statistic, and why? The population would be the number of the students who go to prom. That would be a sample because 250 of the students were surveyed. Even if we wanted all the students at Ray Peck, that still would not be the population because there's more than 250 students and there's more than just juniors that went to prom. That would make this average cost a statistic because it only represents part of the group. We have several definitions today. You should have these with your notes. If you don't, make sure you copy them down. A random sample means that each member of the population has an equal chance of being selected. A biased question shows favor to one thing or another. It can be in how the questions are worded, it can be in how the information is taken, but if it shows favor to something, then it's showing bias. An unbiased sample represents the population that you want the information from, and a biased sample over or underrepresents the population, and the results cannot be considered valid. So we're going to look at each one of these and determine whether each sample is representative of the population, and we're going to explain. Okay, so the first one, to determine the number of hours people exercise during the week, researchers use random digit dialing and call 1,500 people. Would that be a good representation? All right, so even though this first one appears to be unbiased or random sampling, it is not. It is not because the random digit dialing is not as random as it appears. And lots of people don't answer their phone anymore. How about this one? To determine how many text messages high school students send in a week, researchers post a survey on a website and receive 750 responses. No, this is not a random and good sampling either. Part of it is when you post a survey on a website, only people who have strong opinions one way or the other really tend to answer, and so it's not a very good representation. To determine how much money college students spend on clothes each semester, a researcher surveys 450 college students as they leave the university library. Again, not a very good sample because they're only talking to kids as they come out of the library. That could be an unbiased population because of where they're doing it. They're not randomly selecting from across the campus. Okay, now let's take a look and see if these questions are biased, because not only can samples have bias, but the questions can as well. Does eating nutritious whole grain foods improve your health? Yes, that represents a bias. Right here, this nutritious whole grain foods, that implies healthy. And so people are going to be asking, yes, it's healthy, and so they're going to have a bias to it. You could maybe say, what types of foods do you think would improve your health? Then that would be an unbiased, not leading him towards that. B, do you ever attempt the dangerous activity of texting while driving? Again, that represents bias. Dangerous activity, right here, this word right here, that implies that it's already not good, and so it gives a bias to the question. How many hours do you sleep each night? That is unbiased. It's not implying that a certain number of hours is appropriate. It just is asking for a straight answer. How can the mayor of your city improve his or her public image? This one's a little trickier, but it is also biased. The key word here being this improve. It implies that the public image needs to be improved and that there's not a good enough one as it is. If you said, how can the mayor, or what would the mayor's public image be, then that would be a way to reword it without any bias in it. Okay. Now we're going to look to see if samples can be biased, because if the sample is biased, because that's another thing that can be biased. It says 20 pet owners are surveyed at a veterinary clinic to determine if pets should be permitted in hotel rooms. Do you think that's biased or not? Of course it is. Because they're only asking pet owners, so of course they're going to have strong feelings one way or the other. 100 shoppers are asked if the mall hours should be extended. Is that biased? Yes, it is, because these people have an invested interest at the mall. If you ask somebody who doesn't go to the mall regularly, they may not have the same opinion. 50 high school students are surveyed to determine if the amount of homework should be decreased. Is this a biased sample? Yes, I don't know too many high school students who are going to say that no, homework should be increased. And then 20 members of an athletic club were surveyed to determine how many times the average American exercises each week. Again, this is a biased sample. We're only talking to people who exercise, and they're also members of a club. So their athletic ability and their amount of time they spend is going to be more than probably the average person. All right. We now have several different types of samples. Again, you should have these in your notes, but if you don't, take a minute and let's write these down. Self-selected samples, where members volunteer to be part of the sample. This is a very biased sample because people get to choose. And again, if people are choosing, they usually have a strong opinion one way or the other. Systematic sample. A rule is used to select members of the population. For example, you select every other person or every third person. Something along those lines. Stratified sample. A population is divided into smaller groups that share a similar characteristic, and a sample is then randomly selected from each group. For this class, that could be dividing each group by grade, sophomores, juniors, seniors, or the school, freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors. And then maybe even a better grouping than that, and then making sure that you get a random from each group so that each group is represented. Cluster sample. Population is divided into groups or clusters, and then all of the members in one or more of the clusters is selected. It's similar to a stratified sample, except the way we divide them, then we choose the entire group. So if I divided this class into the sophomores, the juniors, and the seniors, then the cluster would be picking one of those, all the juniors, all the sophomores, including all the seniors. Convenience samples, where only members of the population who are easy to reach are selected. I asked the first 5 people to walk by me, or something along those lines. So now we're going to look at what students in our school like we want to determine whether students in your school like the new design of the school's website, and we want to identify the type of sample described. A is you list all of the students alphabetically and choose every 6th student. This is a systematic, because we're asking students, we're separating students alphabetically and then using a rule to divide them. Okay, what about the next one? You mail questionnaires and use only the questionnaires that are returned. That is a self-selected sample. People are getting to choose whether or not they want to participate in this survey. You ask all of the students in your algebra class. This would be a convenience sample. These are people that are readily available. Some of you might think it's a cluster. Which could be made an argument for, but we're going to call it a convenience sample because these are just people who are near you. You randomly select 2 students from each classroom. This would be considered a stratified. Students are divided by classes, which has some unifying characteristic. And then you're selecting a portion of each of those. How about you divide the students in your school according to their zip code and then select all the students that live in that one zip code. This would be your cluster. It would be a cluster because we're grouping them in some way and then selecting all of them that are within one group. Okay, you're going to try these. So pause it here and answer these 2 questions. Does a news organization ask its viewers to participate in an online poll about bullying? This is convenience. And why is it biased? Because only those with a strong opinion tend to reply to those online polls. A computer science teacher wants to know how students at school most often access the internet. The teacher asks students in one of the computer science classes. Oh, excuse me, this one isn't convenience up here. This one is self-selected because they have the choice to reply. Here, where the teacher asks students in one of the computer science classes, what would that be? This one would be a convenience sample. Why is it biased? Because we don't have a random sampling. It's only computer science people. So obviously they're going to have a different view of the internet or how often because of the type of class that they're taking. Okay, here are a few more things to add to your notes if you don't have them already on your notes page. These are the methods of data collection. We have the experiment, where we impose a treatment on individuals in order to collect data on their response to the treatment, and we only change one characteristic. This is what you're most likely used to thinking of in science. For example, if you wanted to know how does sunlight impact plant growth, you would water it the same, you would fertilize it the same, but when it came to how much sunlight, you would vary that. An observational study observes individuals and measures variables without controlling the individuals or the environment. I simply watch maybe students in a cafeteria and see what types of food they choose or how often they're on their phone, something like that. Survey. Every member of a sample is asked 1 or more questions. And simulation. You're going to use a model to reproduce the conditions of a situation or process so the simulated outcomes closely match the real-world outcomes. That's often what they do in science when they can't recreate the experiment. For example, they want to know the impact of a volcano exploding or an earthquake. Those aren't things we can easily recreate, but we can make computer models to do so. So we're going to look at the method of data collection for each of these. Our researcher records whether people at a gas station use hand sanitizer. That is your observational. He's just watching and recording, making no interaction, making no no experiment, no nothing, just taking and observing what people are doing. How about this one? A landscaper fertilizes 20 lawns with a regular fertilizer mix and 20 lawns with a new organic fertilizer. The landscaper then compares the lawns after 10 weeks and determines which fertilizer is better. This would be an experiment because they're changing just one thing, the type of fertilizer. They're trying to keep all other conditions the same. All right, you take a minute and do these. Members of the student council at your school ask every 8th student who enters the cafeteria whether they like the snacks in the school's vending machine. This is a systematic. There's a rule that's being used. How about this one? A park ranger measures and records the heights of trees in a park as they grow. This is observational. He just simply watches and observes what's going on. Try this one. A researcher uses a computer program to help determine how fast an influenza virus might spread within a city. This is a simulation. Can't really recreate that as an experiment. It's not something you just want to observe, but they can make predictions based on a computer model. All right, last question we're going to look at today. I want you to explain why the question might be biased or otherwise introduce the bias into the survey, and I want you to describe a way to correct the flaw. So a dentist surveys his patients by asking, do you brush your teeth at least twice per day and floss every day? Write down why you think that might be a biased question and describe a way to correct the flaw. Now, the bias in this may not be as inherently obvious, but it is because a dentist is asking, and how many of you would feel comfortable telling your dentist that you don't brush your teeth at least twice per day and floss every day? He's implying that that's something that needs to be done, and you might feel guilty if you don't. He's also telling you how many, what the appropriate amount is. So how could we get rid of the bias? We could simply ask, how often do you brush teeth and floss each day? It doesn't imply a certain amount is better than another, and so that takes away that bias. Okay, these are the homework problems that I want you to do on page 615 and 616. 5 through 12, 15 through 18, and 21 through 28.